Hey guys, so I just wanted to make a quick video straight to the point on this topic with Mavuika's rerun coming real soon. And many people have been asking me, is Mavuika still worth pulling on a rerun? This will be her third banner, I believe, which makes her a year and a half old now at this point. Honestly, that used to be a short time in Genshin, but with nowadays power creep, it's kind of a long time, and that will make these characters usually weaker. The thing about Mavuika though, and also with Skirk, if you look at the intended playstyles, then a year and a half later, now they are actually weaker than the new teams. However, because over time people figured out stronger and stronger combo optimizations for these characters, especially Mavuika, that allows them to perform higher than the devs intended and basically allows them to cheat power creep and basically feel like a not quite character. Let me just show a quick example. So if I do my melt team setup here, what is like the most default combo that people do is like they do this and they did that and then maybe they spin again. You're like, okay, that's quite good, especially for a Natlan character, but let me do the same thing with a bit of combo optimization. So same setup. Let's wait a bit for that. And I'm doing like the finisher cancel. And that's just the melt team. Overload team has its own combos as well. So an overload team, I guess if you're just spinning around with Mavuika, something like this is probably what the devs intended you to do. But what people learned is, that's called like the CCD cancel. So probably one of the most like basic, okay, not basic, it's gonna be hard to learn, but that's like one of the essential combos that increased Mavuika's DPS by so much. The whole CCD thing. But as you can tell, Mavuika is the skill character in Genshin. I would say she is the skill character. How long does it take to learn her combos? There's a lot of good videos to watch. I would probably recommend this video by Penguin, their reviewer, and I found this video quite helpful. And there are different combos depending on the team that you're playing, depending on how much you want to min-max. But honestly, I think it's one of those muscle memory things where you probably struggle for ages. Maybe you're like completely flopping a combo, and then all of a sudden you'll just wake up and then you'll know how to do it. So I would say Mavuika can still be the strongest DPS in the game, arguably also the most flexible DPS as well, but it does depend on how much effort you're willing to put into it. She could honestly also be the cheapest DPS as well if you already have her 4-star teammates, like an overload team with Ian-san, Chevrolet, or Roron. Unlike many other modern DPSs, she's not reliant on specific 5-star supports, but she would be reliant on a 4-star character like Ian-san, having her at C6. So you don't want to be missing constellations. So back to the question, would I recommend pulling her? If you're really willing to learn the combos and min-max her, then yes. But for everyone else, I think I would say no. First of all, on a personal note, I personally didn't find Mavuika fun at all when she first came out, until I started learning the combos and until those combos started coming out. But once the combos started coming out and that started to be a thing with Mavuika, I found her to be one of the most fun DPSs, and maybe that's a big selling point for you if you don't want to play boring DPSs. But as you can tell, it's not just about fun. If you aren't doing the combos, then her damage drops massively. The other issue with pulling on a rerun is you're basically being late into learning how to play her and late in investing into her. So it's not just about combos. If you look at a lot of good gameplay online and you think she looks fun, you have to factor in that people have been farming her artifact sets for a long time, and Mavuika, it can be extra long because although she is very flexible with her teams, you know, you have like a raw damage team like Overload where you just want to attack and crit, but you might also have to farm a second set. that has EM if you're playing her in a melt or vaporized team. But that's not just a negative thing. I do want to say that Mavuika build wise does have some huge advantages, which basically no matter which team you play, whether you're playing an overload team or you're playing some sort of melt team, Mavuika is a true super hyper carry, whatever the word is, where she'll be doing like over 95% of your team's damage pretty much no matter which hyper carry team you're playing, which is great investment wise because it means she'll scale really well if you want to get a weapon for her or if you want to grind your artifacts. Mavuika, compared to most characters, you're pretty much getting the highest value, even constellations. Vertically investing into Mavuika, you get some of the hugest gains. And also, speaking of her supports, whether it's like Ian-san, who's a healer, Lali's a shielder, Bennett's a healer, there's also Shilonan, who's a healer, Nicole, who's a shielder. Even though Mavuika's combos are hard to learn, most of our supports are just sustains, so the survivability will be very high. Like I also said, she's one of the characters who works really well with 4 stars. And just looking at some of the other popular modern teams, there aren't many teams that have many slots for 4 stars, especially stuff like Bloom or Freeze. In fact, there is a bit of overlap as well, especially with 4 stars. So I would say if this is a really good melt team for Mavuika, it just requires Lali. And then if you want to do overload as well, that's still 4 stars with like Chevrolet and Auroran. But another downside is because Mavuika's Natlan. At this point, she's honestly like 2 generations behind in that we've moved past enemies designed for Natlan. We have Nod Cry mechanics, we've had Hexarite teams, and very soon we'll have snezhnaya teams as well. That means even though Mavuika is very flexible team wise and gameplay wise, I can show it best in Stygian. These days, although early on it was a lot of Natlan enemies, you're often going to have to go against the odds and have to brute force enemies to the point where like your Mavuika will have to do double the damage a new team would have to do to kill the same enemy. And that can be very stressful. It puts even more pressure on you to invest in your Mavuika well and really learn the combos. And that's always going to be a benefit of pulling a newer team, which is that not only are they going to be easier to play, but most enemies are going to be designed for the newer teams rather than old teams. And that is a big weakness, which is that newer teams are also a lot easier to play than Mavuika or Skirk. In fact, out of all the Nod Cry teams, the main difficulty probably is playing Nefer, because Nefer's ideal teams don't have much survivability, and I guess you have to learn Nefer's basic animation cancel, but that isn't nowhere near as hard as the Mavuika stuff. But it's not only that, I'm not even going to talk about Nod Cry teams too much, because at this point we should be at the tail end of the Nod Cry era, where getting snezhnaya within a couple patches, and with that will come some new eras. So rather than investing into Mavuika, if you're hesitant, I seriously think you're better off waiting to see if you like newer teams and newer characters, because those are likely to also be easier but strong, if not stronger than Mavuika. And as I said, newer snezhnaya teams will have suitable mechanics to deal with new enemies that you'd otherwise have to really brute force with Mavuika, and it might not be fun. So just a quick recap, I would say Mavuika can be worth it for some players if you're looking for a complex DPS that has a lot to them. It's not a very basic playstyle, but you are willing to learn the combos. If you want a flexible character that works as a sub DPS, as a main DPS, as a support, she works with Overload, Melt, Vape, Mono Pyro, just a very flexible character that you might not get much of these days. But speaking of that, in order for her to be flexible, you do have to have the pieces to the puzzle. Like you do want your C6 Ian-san, honestly your C6 Chevrolet. If you want to play Melt, you do want Lali. Mavuika as a sub DPS may not be that relevant with a lot of new teams. That was probably more popular with the Natlan era. Also, if you're okay brute forcing a lot of enemies and going against the odds, having to fight against mechanics, having to work twice as hard. And lastly, if you're okay with potentially not having pulls for the next region, which I would say is a big killer for a lot of players unless you really like Mavuika. I would just say on average, if you're indecisive, you probably should be leaning towards not pulling her, and the people who should pull her are the ones who are aware of all of those factors. But yeah, hopefully that answers your guys' questions.